just coming down Cenotaph Lane, downtown, to the War Memorial, opposite the Ex-Services Club, in one of the main drags of this little town, and they've just done a fresh mow of the grass around the ANZAC Memorial. Here we are. There's a sign against the gate which says "Sacred War Memorial, please keep off." With emphasis on that word, sacred. It's a very simple memorial, a block of marble, lest we forget. Today, across Australia, we will gather in the autumn cool to usher in ANZAC Day. And my little town in far northern New South Wales is no different. Here, not far from the old brick RSL, wedged between the Civic Hall and the fire station, is a rectangle of grass and a memorial where locals will remember the fighting of Gallipoli exactly 109 years ago, and Australian Defence Force personnel engagements down the decades to the present day. Here, across the road from the butcher shop and the laundromat, we uphold the ANZAC tradition. This moment and place is, as the sign says, sacred. We may not have thousands of spectators or big brass bands or famous dignitaries, but the sentiment and gratitude will be the same and plumb as deeply as anywhere in the nation come the hour. Mid-morning, we will have a short parade down the palm tree-lined main street and a game of two-up, of course, in the afternoon. John, the local council worker assigned to mow the memorial lawn in our little town, asks me if he's done a good enough job in anticipation of the service. He has taken his assignment extremely seriously. He used to be a sheep shearer in Western New South Wales and tells me his grandfather, a German, fought on the Russian front during World War II, was shot in the head and was lucky to survive. But as John says, Germans, Japanese, Turkish, Australian, they all fought, and we must honour them and never forget. To commemorate ANZAC Day, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese observed the dawn service in Papua New Guinea and will hike the Kokoda Track, the site of fierce battles and indescribable courage during mid to late 1942, when the Anzacs repelled a major Japanese attack at a critical point of the war.
ANZAC Day, such a special day in this country. You're going to be walking the Kokoda Track. How are you feeling about it?
Oh, look, I'm feeling a little bit nervous, to be honest, Sarah.
You got this, mate.
I'm also really excited. It is such an honour to walk in the footsteps of giants, these extraordinary Australian soldiers who defended our continent in our darkest hour.
In 1989, as a young journalist in Sydney, I had the rare honour of interviewing Jack Ryan, a Gallipoli veteran. He was 94 when I met him at his humble home in Empire Bay on the New South Wales Central Coast. Every ANZAC Day, I think of Jack. He was a 19-year-old postman when he decided to join up and was part of the second wave into ANZAC Cove in 1915. Jack died in 1992, just a few years after we met, but I never forgot his description of landing on the beaches of ANZAC Cove. He said as they got off the boat, the soldier in front of him was fatally wounded. As Jack reached down to help his mate, the others screamed for him to keep going. They left the dead man behind. Jack spent 4 months at Gallipoli before he was shot in the hip during the Battle of Lone Pine. He recovered and went on to fight in France. He got shot there too. 35 long years after meeting Jack, one moment is seared into my memory. That day in Empire Bay, he took down from his mantelpiece an old belt buckle and put it in my hands. It had belonged to a Turkish soldier who had died in battle at Gallipoli. Jack had taken it off the soldier as a souvenir. I held that buckle and I knew I was touching history. You cannot talk about the courage of the ANZACs without referencing Keith Payne. Payne, now 90, was born and raised in Ingham, Canefield country in far northern Queensland. Joined the army in 1951 and served in Korea and Malaya before being posted to Vietnam in early 1969. This is Keith a few years ago talking about ANZAC Day.
Probably what it means to most of the ex-service community and to our nation. It's a day that we have set aside to remember those that gave us the peace of the nation, gave their lives for the peace of the nation. They've served. Some of them lost their lives in action. Others were lucky enough to come home and look after the nation, and we pay homage, we remember them, and in our particular case, we who have served and lost mates, it is time that I can just remember all their names and everything as it goes through. So it's a solemn day for us. But a day that the nation must remember that they gave us peace.
It is classic Payne, humble and self-deprecating. But what he did on a single night in May 1969, the selfless valour and courage in lethal circumstances, actions that earned him the highest and most prestigious award for bravery, the Victoria Cross, is still hard to believe, even after all these years. Coming up, a fierce firefight in the jungles of Vietnam. While I've got you, we'd love you to subscribe to The Australian. Our subscribers get breaking news alerts, newsletters, special events, and detailed analysis and commentary around the clock. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au. We'll be back after this break. Jamie Walker is an associate editor and senior writer for The Australian. And in the newspaper today, he interviews Keith Payne on this most auspicious of days. Just months away from turning 91, Payne is still as straight shooting as ever. And to him, ANZAC Day is everything.
He's basically the soldier's soldier, and I think that's one of the reasons why he is so admired in the military. And he is, despite what people say about Ben Roberts-Smith, Keith Payne is actually Australia's most decorated living soldier. He has 4 awards for valour, including, of course, the Victoria Cross, and he is the last man in Australia to receive the original Victoria Cross, which was an imperial honour. The Australian government changed that in 1991. You don't win a Victoria Cross, you earn it. The future holders of the medal hold what's called the Victoria Cross for Australia, which is an Australian military award.
Payne's heroics in Vietnam remain hair-raising. Can you give us a summation of, indeed, the event that led to him being awarded that extraordinary honour?
It was an extraordinary night. His company became cut off. It was part of a battalion that was confronted by something like a regiment of North Vietnamese regular troops. They were surrounded on 3 sides. So basically you're talking about 800 men or so on the Allied side, confronting a force of between 3,000 and 5,000 Vietnamese troops. His company was pushed back, but in the process, quite a number of men, numbering about 40, were cut off or left because they were wounded. Now, through the course of that night, Keith went out behind enemy lines and either identified and retrieved himself most of those men or organised their rescue by parties from his company. You know, it was extraordinary heroism. He could have been killed on any number of occasions. He was, in fact, hit in the skull, in the head, with the fragment of a rocket-propelled grenade. He didn't want to touch the wound, he said, which was bleeding very heavily because he didn't want to know how bad it was. He had no idea. He was also blown off his feet by a mortar round, and he was hit in the arm and in the hand. And yet he still managed to, in some cases, drag some of these wounded men back to safety. He then led the company past the North Vietnamese positions and got them back to a US Special Forces base.
I mean, that's mind-boggling. What is it about him, or is it impossible to define, you know, when a person meets the moment and, in fact, exposes something within themselves that may not ordinarily be in the bulk of the rest of us?
Well, he says that he was just doing his duty, which I think is a very long straw. He's an incredibly courageous man. He says he's also reflected on this question, you know, what does it take to earn a VC a number of times over his life? And he doesn't really know, but he keeps coming back to the fact that, yes, he was scared. He was scared for himself, but he was also scared for the men who were cut off. And he said, you just have to do your duty. And that's what he sees himself doing that night. He's a very modest man. And I think that this is the sort of courage that everyone can simply look up to on ANZAC Day. It's what it really is all about.
Last year, an epic defamation action brought by another of our VC holders, Ben Roberts-Smith, against media allegations of war crimes and bullying, put the theatre of war into the public spotlight. Roberts-Smith lost the case, but he has found an ally in Keith Payne.
I approached Keith to have a chat about the meaning of ANZAC Day to him. And so that's what it's about. One of the interesting things, though, I think you can't really talk about the VC at the moment without mentioning Ben Roberts-Smith. And he had some very interesting things to say about Roberts-Smith. He hasn't really bought into this before, and he doesn't want to go into the pros and cons, the rights and the wrongs of the defamation case decision last year, which, of course, Ben Roberts-Smith lost, and in which he was branded a war criminal for his actions in Afghanistan. What he does say, though, and he's very adamant about this, is that what happens in war stays in war, because people who aren't there can't really understand what goes on. And they also can't understand what it really takes to earn a VC, as Ben Roberts-Smith has. Now, people will agree or disagree with his point of view, but the one thing you can say about Keith Payne is he's loyal to his friends, he's loyal to his comrades, and in this case, he's loyal to Ben Roberts-Smith.
I told Jamie about my Gallipoli veteran, Jack Ryan, the thrill of meeting someone who was there on that fateful day in 1915, a day Australians and New Zealanders still hold close to their hearts. And how time never stands still, and each year we lose more and more of these precious men and women who served their country and fought for our freedom.
Look, you and I are about the same generation, Matt, and I remember interviewing World War I veterans as well, and I remember being quite shocked towards the end of the fade out of that generation about how quickly we went from having a couple of hundred of these men in the marches to 20 or 30, then 5, then 4 and 3, 2. And, you know, we came to the year, I think it was in the early 2000s, when there were none at all. Now, we're facing that with the World War II generation. And I think the projections are that, you know, within 2 or 3 years, we'll be down to under 1,000. And I think there's just something special about still being able to speak to and interact a survivor of that great generation. And I think we should take every opportunity to hear what these people have to say in the flesh before they're not around.
Journalist and official war historian Charles Bean said the spirit of ANZAC stood for reckless valour in a good cause, for enterprise, resourcefulness, fidelity, comradeship and endurance that will never own defeat. But will we ever be able to truly define it?
I mean, every little town, hamlet, etc., across the nation today will invariably have, for example, a two-up game, which is a happy side to the day. But what sort of day? Is it a solemn day? Is it a happy day? Or is it a combination of both?
Well, I think it's Australia's day. I think ANZAC Day brings us together for a whole variety of reasons. And I think that's another reason why it has such resonance. It's a day where all of us agree to respect the parameters of the day itself. And in that sense, I think it's a very unifying day for the nation, which is one of the reasons why it has growing appeal.
Jamie Walker is an associate editor and senior writer for The Australian. Thanks for joining us on The Front. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, you can join our subscribers and enjoy the best journalism in the nation at theaustralian.com.au.